November 5th meeting of the Raleigh Appearance Commission. The Commission is charged with providing guidance, advice, and recommendations regarding the visual quality and aesthetic characteristics of the City of Raleigh. The members of the Commission are volunteers who are dedicated to the quality of design in Raleigh and represent a varied field of expertise. We will have staff review the staff review report prior to the applicant's presentation and identify administrative alternate findings that the applicant will need to address. For all of you presenting cases today, please take no more than 10 minutes to present your case. I know there's a lot of information and a lot to go through. The more succinct and overall you can be with your presentation gives us time as a commission to ask questions and get feedback that we need. When you arrive at the podium, please state your name and address for the record. Once you present your case, including all the required items, the Commission may ask you questions regarding your case, and then we'll table it for further discussion. After that, we may ask you to come forward for further clarification. After the discussion, the Commission will set forth a recommendation to the Planning Director for a final determination. Thank you, and we will now start the agenda. Case AAD 1919 for 215 South McDowell Street.
Okay. Well, I hope you all like the sound of my voice because I'm going to be reading to you for quite a bit. I am going to start with a summary of the design adjustments and variances also being sought for this project. So for design adjustments, there are multiple design adjustments for the minimum 200-foot driveway spacing requirement, design adjustments for the requirement that the owner provide cross-access to abutting lots, and for to retain existing right-of-way widths of surrounding streets. For variances, there is a variance from the minimum building height requirement for street-facing building facades to comprise 75% of the lot's width at a minimum building height, 3 stories for district zoned 20 stories. Variances to the height encroachment allowances for the purpose of permitting an enclosed stair access and elevator penthouse, an outdoor screened area, mechanical equipment, and cooling towers on the office building, and multiple variances for minimum distances of driveways from streets, 150 feet to 200 feet required depending on the street. And so those will be heard on next Monday on the 9th. Okay, for the staff report, the applicant is requesting administrative alternates to sections 1.5.6 build to, 1.5.8 pedestrian access, 1.5.9 transparency, and 3.3.3 building massing. So we'll start with build to. The build to is the area on the lot where a certain percentage of the front principal building facade must be located, measured as a minimum and maximum setback range from the edge of the proposed or existing right-of-way, whichever is greater. The required percentage specifies the amount of the front building facade that must be located to the build to, in the build to, measured based on the width of the building divided by the width of the site or lot. The build to is intended to provide a range of building placement that strengthens the street edge along the right-of-way, establishing a sense of enclosure by providing spatial definition adjacent to the street. The building edge can be supplemented by architectural elements and certain tree plantings aligned in a formal rhythm. The harmonious placement of buildings to establish the street edge is a principal means by which the character of an area or district is defined. The build-to range is established to accommodate some flexibility in spacing site and specific site design while maintaining an established street edge. The applicant is proposing a 3.29 acre development with a downtown mixed-use 20-story shopfront zone. The development will consist of an office building with structured parking, a mixed-use apartment building, a mixed-use residential condominium building, and a mixed-use hotel building. Since the site has a shopfront frontage, the build-to is 80% of the lot width, between 0 feet and 15 feet of the primary street. Martin Street and Salisbury Street have been designated as primary streets for this development proposal. The applicant is seeking an alternate for the 2 buildings along Martin Street, the apartment and the office building. The applicant states that the buildings occupy 57.9% of the primary street lot width. The applicant is proposing a pedestrian public plaza in the space between the 2 buildings that meet the UDO requirements for urban plazas and will contain outdoor seating, tables, and a stairway. With the addition of the portion of the public plaza and pedestrian entranceway along Martin Street, the applicant states that the combined buildings and amenity area will occupy 91% of the lot width. So the findings that are to be met for Build 2 are that the approved alternate meets the intent of the Build 2 regulations, conforms with the comprehensive plan and adopted city plans, does not substantially negatively alter the character-defining street wall or establish a Build 2 pattern that is not harmonious with the existing built context, that the change in the percentage of building that occupies the Build 2 area or increased setback does not negatively impact pedestrian access, comfort, or safety, and that site area that would have otherwise been occupied by buildings is converted to an outdoor amenity area. Okay, so if there are no questions, I'll move on to pedestrian access. Feel free to stop me at any time if you do have questions. For pedestrian access, the intent of the ordinance is that the street-facing entrance regulations are intended to concentrate pedestrian activity along the street edge and provide an easily identifiable and conveniently located entrances for residents, visitors, and patrons accessing a building as pedestrians from the street. Access points should be located or identified in a manner visible to the pedestrian from the street and be accessible via a direct path. As part of the Nexus development, the applicant is requesting an alternate to pedestrian access requirements along Salisbury and Martin Streets, both designated as primary streets. The site is zoned DX20 shopfront frontage. Per shopfront standards, primary street-facing entrances are required at a maximum spacing of 50 feet. The applicant states that the large format retail space along Salisbury Street is not suited for multiple street-facing entrances, so the applicant is requesting only one entrance for the ground floor retail space. Along Martin Street, the project has been designed in a way that service areas take up a significant portion of the street-level facade, limiting the number of pedestrian access points. The entrances that are provided on both streets are recessed and enhanced for greater visibility for pedestrians. The applicant is proposing a vehicular pedestrian connector through the development and under the office building at Martin and Salisbury Street that also serves as the development's amenity area. Active uses, building lobbies, and pedestrian access points are focused on this connector space. This results in service areas and several vehicular access points located on public streets, providing multiple pedestrian conflicts in the public realm. The findings to be met for this case are that the approved alternate meets the intent of the street-facing entrance regulations, conforms to the comprehensive plan and adopted city plans. The pedestrian access point is easily identifiable by a pedestrian, customer, or visitor. Recessed or projected entries or building elements have been incorporated into the design of the building to enhance visibility of the street-facing entrance, and that the pedestrian route from the street to and bus stops and other modes of public transportation are safe, convenient, and direct. Okay. Moving on to transparency. The transparency requirements are intended to lend visual interest to street-facing building facades for both pedestrians and building occupants and minimize blank wall areas. This is not applicable to residential uses. On the Martin Street facade of the apartment building, the project provides only 57% of the 66% required amount of ground floor transparency and only has 37.7% of the required 50% transparency between 3 feet and 8 feet of the Martin Street facade. The facade is slated primarily for utility access for functional building needs. In lieu of meeting the transparency requirements along Martin Street, the applicant proposes creating visual interests with a combination of vertical pilasters, doors, frames, and glazing. The applicant is proposing a vehicular pedestrian connector through the development and under the office building that also serves as the development's amenity area. Active uses, building lobbies, and pedestrian access points are focused on this connector space. This results in service areas and several vehicular access points along the street-level ground floor of the building, limiting opportunities for transparency and other architectural features that create pedestrian interest along the public realm. The findings to be met for transparency are that the approved alternate meets the intent of the transparency requirements, the approved alternate conforms with the comprehensive plan and adopted city plans, and that the street-facing building facade utilizes other architectural treatments to create visual interest to offset the reduction in transparency. All right, we are almost there. Building massing. The intent of the building massing regulation is to manage the impact of tall buildings located near the public right-of-way. Setbacks are intended to provide access to light and air at the street level, mitigate wind impacts, produce a consistent street wall, and visually reduce the perceived scale of a building to avoid a canyon effect. The office building does not meet the massing standards that require a 15-foot minimum setback between the 3rd and the 7th floor on both the Martin Street and Salisbury Street facades. Additionally, the apartment building proposes a 10-foot setback on both the Martin and McDowell facades rather than the 15-foot setback that is required. The applicant has stated that the other buildings in the development are in compliance with the massing standards. The office building proposes a series of stepbacks along both Martin and Salisbury streets, but they do not run the full length of the block. The corner element of the building at Martin and Salisbury shows a nearly unbroken wall along the entire height of the building on both streets. The applicants state that the proposed alternates for the office and apartment building massing provide 44% more light and air to the pedestrian street environment than the massing requirements of the UDO. The proposed massing alternate provides 6,165 square feet more of ground-level open space than required by the UDO. The change in materials and the change in wall plane help to define a base, middle, and top. The findings to be met for massing are that the approved alternate meets the intent of the building massing regulations, conforms with the comprehensive plan and adopted city plans. If the approved alternate uses a change in building materials to mimic a change in wall plane, the most substantial and durable building materials are located at the bottom floors of the building. If the approved alternate proposes a building setback behind the sidewalk in lieu of a required step back, the resulting open space includes public amenities such as a seating area, trees, and landscaping or outdoor dining. And finally, that the building contains architectural treatments for delineating the base, middle, and top of the building. All right, are there any questions?
I'm going to recuse myself.
Okay.
All right, if there are no questions, will the applicant please step forward?
Good afternoon. Scott Lahr, 613 Hillsborough Street, representing the development and the design team who are here today. Through our correspondence this week, we're aware that the commission has already familiarized themselves with the packet, so we'll try to make the exhibits brief, but do want to step through a little bit of the overview. We'll try to focus instead of the reading, which was good and comprehensive, but we'll try to tell you just a little bit about the spirit behind it as well. So on the screen now you see the general layout of the project with the 4 high-rise buildings. In the middle, which we'll talk about in the next slide for a second, is an urban plaza that we are seeking to create as well as part of the project. So here on the first floor, the main ground plan, a couple things to note. There is very little, really almost no on-grade parking. We've gone to pretty good lengths to push the parking below grade or above grade to get it out of the street plane. A lot of what you would like you to focus on is the sort of the lime green colors. That's all active use retail. And if you'll notice, it's on Salisbury as well as Martin Street at the bottom of the page, and then it wraps to the interior of the block too, to activate that plaza. So we've taken about as much perimeter as we can find while still servicing the buildings to really activate the entire development, both on the street side as required, and then on the inner side of the block as well. One of the feedback we got some this week in correspondence probably was about the apartment building, specifically fronting on Martin. A couple things to note. The nature of the design was that the retail on the left side of the image was really there to activate the intersection of McDowell and Martin, and it also relates to the active use area of the Justice Center directly across the street. And so there we get a nice two-sided activity on the street. As you travel to the right on Martin towards town, the Justice Center is really fairly unapproachable. High planter walls, one garage entry exit, and that's it. And so in recognition of some of that, because we can't provide two-sided retail, which would be greatly preferred in terms of activity in a city street, so, and because we need to service the building from somewhere, so we dedicated that zone sort of mid-block to get it away from the intersection. Mid-block, we do though have what's nice is an additional, in the pink, we have an additional activity zone mid-block with the residential entry and exit. So we've done our best to try to satisfy the functions of the building, but also to keep the street active. You've seen these images before. I'll briefly just spin around the site. Here, the intersection of Martin and Salisbury. To orient you, you're looking at the office building in the foreground and the apartment building to the left. And as we proceed down Martin, you're focusing there on the apartment building and then the condo building to the left. And then on McDowell, you start to see Nash Square there on the right with the condominium and apartment building fronting. And then around the back of the site again on Salisbury, you're seeing the office building on the left and sort of the hotel sort of inside the mid-block. We included this image just to give you a sense of the character of the internal plaza, to give you a sense of the activity and the connection. And we're really working to create a east-west sort of, recognition of pedestrian flow through the city from east to west and west to east, and then really connect to Nash Square and hopefully sort of engage Nash Square in the activity there right into the development. So relative to the request today, the build 2, you see here, of course, the required 80% along Martin, and what was explained here is in green. We're glad to have the ability here to provide not building build 2, but plaza space, active plaza space in the green along Martin, and that is all greater than 10 feet in depth, so it's a nice add. So it brings the perceived build to over 91% in excess of the requirement. The second request with the spacing of entrances, we do have, as was mentioned, around the loading zone and along what we hope will be an urban grocer or a large format retailer in the upper right, we do have an occasion to not meet the 50-foot spacings. That being said, the entrances that you are seeing are really every one of them is recessed, number one. They have architectural treatments to them, canopies, signage, lighting, those sorts of things. So they're highly recognizable, and in fact, we want them to be. They're almost all retail or lobby entrances. The third request regarding transparency on Martin, we are a little bit below the requirement, but that being said, we do have quite a bit of visual interest at the base of the building, material changes, materiality, and we also have, if you look right above the dashed line, the UDO limit, we do have additional transparency along Martin. It's just falling just a little bit higher than is recognized by the UDO. Generally speaking, the development, other than this facade, if you look, here it is an aggregate with the office building on the right. And the office building does meet transparency requirements. All the other facades, in all other street-facing facades of the building do come with about a 5 to 10%, depending on the building, excess transparency. So we're doing pretty well in the development as a whole. It was just this one facade here. And then finally, moving to building massing, as we look at the standard, what the prescriptive UDO massing here with the step back, level 7 and the height and the sort of the wedding cake approach for light and air in the streetways. And then you take a look at what we've created, and it's a little bit subtle there, but hopefully you'll notice a couple things. One, we've, if you will, have a 3-tiered wedding cake instead of a 2-tiered. We've the apartment building on the left of the image is 28 feet shorter than it could be, so that helps mitigate the canyon effect in the streets. And then the step backs that we do have, and we have step backs just about everywhere. We do think it's important on the corner of Martin and Salisbury to develop a strong active corner and reinforce the intersection there. That being said, we've done what we can everywhere else around the block to bring that down and bring the step backs to bear there. The differences that we're asking for are relatively subtle. On the left in the apartment building, it's a 10-foot step back instead of 15-foot, and it's at the third floor. It's a tall first floor, but third floor rather than higher up as would be prescribed. And on the right, the office building, those step backs do meet the depth. However, they're 3.5 feet above the UDO ask. So they're just a little bit high, and that just has to do with the floor-to-floor spacing and the massing overall. In plan, you can see primarily in yellow would be the ask of the UDO, or the request that for the amount of step back. And then in this image is the amount that we've provided. And so it is quite a bit in excess as an aggregate of the whole development of the project. We were 44% more light and air than UDO baseline. In addition, at the ground level, we are seeking additional setback in lieu of step back. And you can see here, it's a little tough to read maybe, but in the orange and blue, there's quite a bit along the street frontages there of additional setback that we provided, plantings, furnishings, and all that sort of activity going on in those spaces. This gives you a flavor of some of those occasions where the additional setback is: tables, chairs, trees, plaza, benches, dining, those sorts of activities. So we're about over 6,000 square feet of additional ground level activation in setback than prescribed. And then as we look at the project in section around the block, you see on Salisbury looking south, we do have the step back that is about 3.5 feet higher than requested. But given the nature of the street as it is today, at least, we don't really have many light and air concerns there. Not many other tall buildings. And then as you look at Martin Street facing east, you see in the background there on the left, you see our sort of strong corner design, we'll call it, to reinforce the intersection. But then coming towards Nash Square, we do reintroduce the step back again. And on the right, you're seeing the Justice Center with its considerably lower volume over there. So it's not certainly not a built-out canyon condition in its current state. And then as you come further yet, and you see the apartment building and its step back a little bit lower towards the street, but commensurate to the existing Justice Center on the right. And the advantage on Martin Street is that with these taller buildings being to the north, they don't really cast a shadow line for that streetway. So it's probably more of a reasonable look at air than light on Martin Street. And then similarly, when you come around to Nash Square, we do have a step back there, but of course with Nash Square and its presence, the light and air quality is well maintained. So in aggregate, if you look at the development again from Salisbury and Martin, we have the strong corner with a sort of a carved away plaza at the corner for activation. So we're trying to get best of both worlds, reinforcing the intersection above, but being very welcoming and active down below at the street level. And then as you go down either Martin Street or Salisbury Street, the development starts to carve away and become much more porous vertically, lots of step backs, balconies, other things. So it's we feel that the massing there is a respectable trade-off, one for the other. And then similarly, and even more generous on McDowell and Martin, you see there the step back turning the corner and the relief there for light and air quality. And then similarly, each of the buildings is looked at. We do have a base, middle, and top, as these diagrams showed, and all the materiality is quite durable. You're talking about stone and brick and glass and metal at the street level. That was the office building there. And then same approach, just the base, middle, top are dedicated a little bit differently on the apartment building. Similar materiality. And so to wrap up, we hope that the the kind of the thought and energy that had been put into the design to meet the asks and the requests of the baseline UDO, but then really elevate those and use those in a way that is even a higher value and better design. 44% more light and air and over 6,000 more square feet of setback than the baseline. Happy to answer questions or comments after you discuss.
I have a question regarding building massing. Along Martin Street, where you're using the setback in lieu of step back, what is the, if you add those two together, the step back that you're providing plus the setback that you're providing? I think I saw 17'7" or something somewhere, but I just wanted to understand that. And maybe walk us through that everywhere you're using that alternate.
Right, so along Martin here, you see the 16-foot sidewalk indicated there, and then in the orange is the 12-foot for additional. So that's that zone there. And then as you come up Martin, looks like about an additional 4 feet in this zone, plus or minus here, 4 feet, 2 feet. And then on Salisbury, there's your 16-foot sidewalk and an additional 5 feet, almost 6 feet there in that zone. And then as you come further up Salisbury, about 1 foot more.
And what's the step back along Salisbury where you have only the 1 foot more setback?
The step back there on the office building is 17 feet.
Okay, so it already meets it. You're not using it as an alternate there. Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
With regards to transparency, on the Martin Street side, I believe it is. Let me just verify here. Yes. Do you have a rendering that shows the pedestrian experience from the street level, specifically with the utility and back of house area?
Let me see if it shows up in the image. So in this image here, you're seeing the glazing there. Back of house starts about here, and through to about this zone, about this zone here. And let me see if it shows in the rendering. Yeah, the rendering does not go up quite that far, but the treatment, I would say along is very similar to this at the podium of the building, the base of the building. It's just that it's further off the screen here. So it would still be brick, louvers, and these infills, could be coiling doors, could be metal panel. We introduced a metal panel in some of those openings to keep a rhythm and materiality change going, even though there's not glazing.
Okay, thank you.
Could you talk about it looks like there are about 9 parking spaces on this interior alley. Can you talk a little bit about the vision for those? Are those kind of rapid loading, unloading? Are they? Yep.
They're really very limited time. We call them teaser parking for the retailers and for the hotel. Okay. So they're 15-minute, 30-minute, something like that.
Okay.
So I want to ask the big ticket question for me anyway, and it's a statement and a question kind of combined. So permit me that, if you don't mind. So historically we've always had these odd spaces mid-block that were kind of left over, right? Everything developed along the street because that's where you had access to people who had money and retail, and so I appreciate on some level the ability or what you're trying to accomplish by creating a zone in the middle of the block that's active, right? But historically, those areas were dedicated to the back of house, right? It was where the dumpsters and transformers and things that weren't beautiful to be on the public streets would live. And I am just wondering, like specifically for the apartment building, but also for the one on the corner, like Martin Street, and you even alluded in your presentation that, you know, primary pedestrian flow is east-west because everybody's trying to get to Main Street, right? And so, you know, it just seems odd for me. I mean, half the alternates that you're seeking are because they're on the outside, on the public face, as opposed to on the interior. And I just wanted to kind of hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we've looked at it at the design both ways quite a bit, and we just if we look at design on the parcel itself, just excluding the context, then I think you're right, and there's a lot of reasons to do that. Where we sort of perpetually came up a little bit short was, one, the parcel of land in aggregate that we're trying to put these buildings on. In some ways, it's a little too narrow, in some ways, it's a little too wide. And so it becomes an effort of best use. And the best use, we thought the greatest good was to create that interior plaza. We hope that people will end up using that instead of Martin Street, quite honestly, as the east-west connector. I mean, that would be our hope for use.
Which is maybe not great for the city, though. That's sort of, I think, that is the crux of the conversation that we need to have, and especially with the Justice Center on the other side.
Right.
You know,
right.
I do walk that way almost every day, and so to have two dead zones.
Yeah, the reality is, and we talk a lot about good retail design too, and if you can't get a two-sided street with active uses on both streets, the chances are you may not, very likely you may not get a retailer. Even if you give them an active use, you may have a difficult time finding a tenant that wants it, number one, or will stay, number two, because they're not getting that dynamic, retail, restaurant, shopping zone feeling. And so it just becomes very difficult to sustain it. Even if we design and build it, it doesn't mean it will succeed. And so I think that was our concern, balanced against the other concerns of needing service and design.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? There's a lot of stuff to talk about. Huh? Yeah.
I'd say one of my questions in terms of pedestrian access, when you're looking at the Martin Street side, you have recessed the accesses, and I see tables on the Martin Street Salisbury corner, but the recessed access right before the entrance on the Martin Street side, I don't think there's any renderings of that, and you're counting it as amenity and step back, and I'm just wondering what it looks like, if it's how much amenity it's providing.
You're speaking of this zone here, or
Right.
just
The yellow.
That yellow section in the middle.
this here?
Right there, yeah.
Got it.
Because that's an access that's flanking a really long empty space.
Yeah.
And if that's not interesting,
Correct.
it just adds to that length.
So we think it'll be interesting. It better be interesting because that is the primary residential entry.
So do you have anything
so-
to show what that looks like? or how it
Probably
feels?
not. I don't think other than elevation. Let me see that. Right, so
Yeah,
this
right there.
zone right here. So
Yeah.
double height glass is what we're envisioning there. Double height glass, there will no doubt be signage, lighting, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Probably I would ask my compatriot here, but probably benches outside and things. Uber, it'll be, Uber, inherently an Uber drop, pickup, that kind of, so I think there'll be some
Yeah.
activity there.
Yeah, and then along with that concern, you've got loading on both sides of that pedestrian access and cars coming in and out just next to it. And so
Correct.
for just pedestrian safety, you've got, I've seen what happens when those trucks come back out. I think both of those vehicles are going to have to back out of those loading zones. Is that correct?
Correct.
Kind of that whole mix is got some question marks in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it to some degree, we try to make this, this active use here, the entry to the residential. We do have a grand stair here up to the plaza. You do have cars coming and going. You do have trucks coming and going. That being said, we did not put and really could not put any of our maneuvering on McDowell because of DOT, much heavier traveled street. And so that would have only left the interior block, which then quickly sort of degrades the plaza experience with trash trucks and delivery.
Scott, what's just to the left of the residential lobby? Looking at your floor plan, there's a couple of rooms there right along the street front.
Correct. So we have some back of house utility rooms there. Some have doors, some do not.
Yeah, it just looks like they're not labeled, but
Let's see, we can go back to the floor plan. Don't know if they are labeled on the overall. Yeah, there you go. So water service room, fire pump room. There's your one bay loading, and then and some loading dock space, and
Oh, I
then
didn't look at
transformer
that.
vault, which probably would not be used very much as far as accessing goes.
I didn't look at that one. Oh, fire pump and water.
So the only, and that's why the only drive cut you're seeing there is for trash service. The other items would be of rare enough occasion that you don't need a drive cut.
Any other questions?
Just to the right of that residential lobby, as you're entering that road, is there a significant grade change from Martin Street to the interior, or is it kind of dead flat
To the garage or to the plaza?
to the plaza?
To the plaza there is. There's a large staircase here
Yeah.
going up to the plaza. The grading works such that the entry to the garage is almost flat,
Oh, okay.
if that
I
helps
see
you.
that.
It makes sense.
Okay.
Just one more question. On the Salisbury side, the vehicle and pedestrian connector, does that, it's hard for me to see on the diagram here, but does that connect to above ground or below ground parking, or is it strictly at grade, kind of cutting through the site?
It is flat at grade. No, that is not your garage entry. That's
Okay.
correct. Garage entry is off of Hargett.
Can you show us on that elevation drawing, that composite elevation drawing, the garage entry? Because I'm not seeing it on there, and I might just be reading the drawing wrong.
I'm sorry, which
On the
entry?
elevation of Martin Street, the garage entry.
It would be right here. You're correct. There's
Yeah.
a very faint line in there that comes across right at the top of those stairs.
Yeah.
So is there,
So that's your entry.
on top of that garage entry, what are you seeing? Are you seeing
Uh,
fence with
yeah.
some amenity? tables?
Landscaping, we've been debating some sculptures and other things, active use. There's, we've been discussing kiosk sales and things up on the plaza. So.
Did you look at, is there a scenario where that connector on Salisbury wouldn't be needed? That could be additional retail or frontage versus corridor?
It could. I don't believe that there is a UDO prescriptive reason not to, but it was really to get the one-way, it's a one-way drive, to get one-way flow through the site, utilize the hotel, drop off at the hotel, food and beverage, restaurants, just to not make your only access to be off of McDowell.
Is it fire related?
It is fire related. Yep, it's a fire lane as well, coming through the center of the site.
Let me ask you a couple questions on the that vehicular pedestrian connector. And I mean, it's an extremely complex site, and I laud you for all we're doing here and all the, you know, it's a big Lego we're trying to put together here. But, you know, if to Brandy's point about, you know, creating this quote unquote dead zone on Martin Street, and that's got to go somewhere, and I think Martin Street's the place to put it. But if you're a pedestrian walking on Martin or up, you know, one of the north-south connectors, I believe that the entry levels for the pedestrian areas on that vehicular pedestrian connector need to be such that it's glowingly obvious that's where you should walk if we are, you know, in lieu of a dead zone. So what on those entryways are going to lead people to say, hey, you know, let's not take the Martin Street, you know, path, let's take the connector path. And I think that's going to be a big component of ultimately the success of how that kind of plays out for a pedestrian. And I think you got it, but I want to just, if you can talk about those two pockets of where you come off of Salisbury and McDowell, you know, to lead in there, I think that's really going to be key.
So, right, agreed. So this is our rendering so far off of Salisbury. Mm-hmm. So pretty prominent. It's you can tell by the scale of the people and cars. It's pretty generous.
Yep.
It's tall and wide both.
And it's lit, and there's all that kind of activation component right up to it.
That's right. It's lit, and also it's predominantly lined with a lot of glass front even under it. So you'll get a lot of lighting from inside the retailers spilling into the space also. And then on the...
Let me stop you. Because one reason I ask is right there, it looks like iron and steel, almost like a garage. And so maybe that's not the way it looks, but maybe it's all in the perception of what I'm seeing on paper. It maybe doesn't do it justice.
Right. It's not rendered to the same level as the
And I'm
other
trying to help
ones.
you here.
Yeah.
I think you're on the right path. I'm not trying to be oppositional, but...
No, we've got, I mean, there's the materiality at the base of the building being stone and glass and some higher polish finishes would carry into that space also. It's just not rendered that way yet in the black and white. With regard to the other end, let's see, back up one. Perhaps a little hard to tell here, but you get a sense of when you pull in, it's a pretty broad. It's a bit of a turnaround porte cochere for luggage drop and things like that for the hotel. The hotel, you have an intentional canopy and sign band for the hotel, so that will be your marquee entrance feature along there, in addition to the retailers under the apartment building. But I think coming off of Nash Square, partially because it's not covered overhead and it's a little bit broader than on Salisbury, so that will feel almost as broad as a city street.
Yep. And there's step backs from the retail into the, I guess it does step down, not step back, steps into the property, right?
Correct.
But there's no like marquee like Chinatown, here we are, and there's none of that, right? Yeah, okay.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. That's a good thing, in my opinion.
Lanterns.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Might you have anything else on hand with regards to the garage entry? Because in our packets that we received earlier in the week and even today, you couldn't tell where it was. And so the more information you can provide, that would be great. Because that is in that same utility block A lot of activity, both for vehicles, utility vehicles and pedestrians, very concentrated right in that space.
Right. Chris, I don't think we have anything in the packet, do we, that really shows that any greater degree we could create it, but.
I don't think we have anything with us.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything in the packet, but we could certainly create it after the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, we have the views, we just have to spin the model and get into it.
I mean, from my perspective, I think the challenge is the loading and the service facilities in the right location. From a development perspective and how the being in that field and understanding that really well, I think you guys have solved sort of the development-related problems well. And so I think things are in the right place from my perspective. I think that there's probably some better things that we can do or you can do to kind of handle this mechanical in its existing location. You see it in New York City a lot where you've got the window patterns and it doesn't change, yet they're creating almost like a vitrine sort of setup or decals that sort of continue that facade.
Sure.
And I'm not seeing that, at least in this floor plan. And so from my perspective, that might be where the work can sort of be had.
And we've talked about that as a concept. If there was a concern of treating the roll, you can do the same thing with the roll down doors. You can do the same thing with grates and grills, and so certainly treatment on those is very reasonable.
Any other questions?
Just a comment, if you're gonna bring something back, could you put bus stops, the local bus stops, so we can get an idea where people are coming from
Sure.
on buses? Thanks.
All right. All right, we'll table it and discuss, and if we have questions, we'll bring you back up, okay?
Thank you.
All right. All right.
Public.
Oh, public, is there anyone from the public who would like to comment? Seeing that there's no one, tabling it. It's funny when projects come through with just build to, we can spend a lot of time just talking about build to. That one is kind of like the non-conversation here.
Yeah.
Do we want to go, I think for me, it might be helpful to kind of go item by item and just kind of talk about the different pieces that we're going to have to flesh out on this one to really get to a place of being able to recommend anything.
I think overall, like, it's important to realize this is probably the most complex thing that the commission's ever seen. I mean, Smoky Hollow was closed and there were multiple asks there, and it's also important to remember they're not all going to get it 100% right. But like, yeah, but I think the effort here is phenomenal, and to take Corey's comment, like, the components I think are in the right place, and how are they treated? That's right.
Yeah.
I have a really tough time with the location of the components along Martin Street. I think at least some of them have to be inboard. It can't all be bad for the city. And I don't know from a development standpoint how the relationship of all the parts and pieces go, but if I just look at the massing of it and it being lengthwise stretched out along Martin Street, I gotta think you could make it rectangular going the other way and at least have half that on the internal and half that on the external. I mean, it's just, it's just proportions and what you're doing internally and balancing that with what you're doing negative to the city at the same time.
So it's a greater good question in your component. Yeah.
It's 100, like, I love that pedestrian idea,
Yeah.
but what the negative it does on Martin Street is really hard to overcome.
I think for me, the challenge is the context. And what's on the other side of Martin Street is really kind of difficult to sort of
And we're
wrap
making
your
it
head-
worse.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the problem. Like, if you put all the back stuff there, and we've just said that the east-west flow of pedestrian traffic is, along
yeah.
Martin Street, then, and yes, wouldn't be great for the developers. This is a snarky comment, so take this for what it is. Let's funnel it through the development instead of along the city street. But I get that there's a synergy of turning those retail spaces and public fronts where you have two-sided streets.
Sure.
I do understand that mix, so.
And I get it. I just think that, what as a project and as a city, the counterpoint to that is you want successful retail.
Absolutely.
And I think it's going to be a real challenge, for example, in that spot.
Well,
So that's what
yeah,
I'm grappling
totally.
with.
Yeah, it has to be.
I don't know what the answer is.
It has to be successful. One of the things that I realized talking about the one-sided versus two-sided is, 2 blocks west we have one-sided retail, all occupied. 1 block east we have one-sided retail, all occupied. Even on the same block across the Salisbury from this project, Lucette Grace, Deco, all that stuff is essentially one-sided. So for better or for worse, we have it. It seems to be not a huge challenge so far. And I think with this corridor, it's the main east-west corridor in downtown in a lot of ways. And you look at you're connecting Moore Square to Nash Square. You're connecting Union Station to the other side of downtown. I think having a dead block right in the heart of that is a huge issue. Not that it's all dead, but you have the 2 corners, but having both sides be empty in the middle is really tough. Yeah.
Well, it is really an urban discussion versus, and that's what you said earlier, because all of the little pieces, I think we could probably say they're not making it better or worse. They're probably meeting the requirements, but it's sort of what does this new block separation do, and how do this is a very important piece of our city.
It is, and I think for the commission, we want to help developers create successful developments because we all benefit from that, but we also have to protect the public realm. It's sort of why we're here. So it's a big conversation.
For me personally, I really like how a lot of the aspects of this project are handled, but I completely agree with Brandy. I mean, I lived on Martin Street for 15 years. I can't imagine walking down there and it just being just this wasteland, basically dead zone.
Well, and I mean, with the connection with the garage that we're looking at too, you've got almost 122 feet of loading utility plus the garage.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's, approximately 30. I don't know.
You have 241 feet of blank space based on my
It's more than half the block is blank
Yes.
On both sides.
on both sides.
Yeah.
I'll say I think the massing is done really well.
Yeah, it's great.
It's super thoughtful. The facades on pretty much all sides. Again, really challenging project. I think it shows a lot of thought and attention to detail. To have something that we're proud of overlooking Nash Square and this whole corridor. So I think, again, we'll go piece by piece, but I think that part's great.
All right.
Something I wonder about is if the 150-foot spacing between Salisbury and Martin intersection and the turn-in on not Salisbury, on McDowell and Martin, do we think that the variances and design adjustments are going to be approved for that? Because if those aren't, then widening
It might
of
impact
that,
that
could change everything. So I just kind of wonder.
Well, and that's a really good point. I should have said this when the applicant got finished presenting before we even started talking. But, as we review this, how the design morphs and changes over time, just because we might not have any problems with build to, for instance, or building massing something, for instance, we might have issues with it once all the other changes are taken. I feel like all of these have to keep coming back as a whole.
Yeah.
Because every one thing impacts every one other thing.
Yeah.
And so if it does get wider, to your point, Adam, then we need to see it again because it changes the
And it might help.
conversation.
It might help the whole equation.
Yeah, that's a good.
And we looked at the Fallon project, and there was a similar, everybody used the word dead zone. But we were able to overcome that by celebrating those corners, which did a really, he complimented that very well, and I think there's an ode to that here.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that one, the difference is that they weren't also then having a really swanky mid-center block thing that, was again attracting the public away from the public right of way and into an internal private retail experience.
We don't think is it private, really?
Well, and that's the question, who controls it?
Yeah. I mean, I think from the conversation I had to him was, if it's welcoming, then,
It's still private,
coming, yeah.
Like by definition.
One question I have, just, and we're not going to answer it today, but at the corner of Martin and Salisbury, just to the left of the retail, there's a spot that, there's tables and chairs in front of it, but it's utility function. And so,
Oh, yeah.
to me, that would probably look and feel like retail, yet we're calling it dead zone right now.
Well, I think
And
it's
so I'm
the,
wondering if
Isn't that the,
if-
the residential entrance?
that's here.
Right beside it?
I'm talking about this zone right there.
Uh-huh. Because I think
Like
you're
that
right.
probably
will wrap
feels
around.
like retail, and I'm wondering how much of this could sort of
Take on that character.
take on that character
Yeah.
and sort of accomplish what we're all looking for. Because I think it's a look and a feel. It's like, it's not that we need a retail door. Or do we?
It's an active use and pedestrian entrance. I mean, at least per the UDO, that's the things that we're looking at.
Okay.
But to your point, on that Salisbury Street end, it definitely, because it's sort of contiguous with that corner retail experience, that starts to mitigate.
It seems to work.
It does.
That's
It-
what I'm saying.
It definitely
It seems to
does.
work. And is there other ways to
Can you-
solve some of this? I mean, I don't know.
And if it's also then somehow integrated with the retail on the corner of McDowell
That's
and
right.
Martin, then that could also start to help. And I'm gonna show you the sketch. This is just a random sketch, but this is my thought about that, and I'll show it to y'all too in a minute. This is my thought about the
We don't get
orientation
You're an
of
architect.
that. But still, so this currently is, and again, I keep picking on this. This is not great either. We can talk about that too, but this one element is stretched out that way. Is there a way
I
to-
like that.
to just, it's the same
It's a
size.
compromise.
And could it be a compromise?
Well,
And I don't know.
And I think one way that we could
Just pass that
um,
way for a second.
sort of articulate that idea is to give, all right, out of this block face, X%
This is, yeah.
could be used for
Yeah,
loading, or
this
X
is the
feet.
biggest question to me.
And I think it'll all be part and parcel. Like, I think we're gonna have to have them come back. Like, my assessment on questions that were raised and more information that's needed.
Other items are the
But,
9th.
but definitely, when we get to a place where we're starting to offer conditions and things like that, that's exactly the kind of,
Well, and the review, the other bit is happening on Monday.
well, that's true. That's true.
The what? Can you say that
The
again?
variances.
The
they're gonna-
variances are
before the
being
board.
reviewed on
Board
Monday.
On Monday.
So this linear pedestrian street is still in,
Adjustments.
I guess, in approval process. We
Explain
don't-
to us exactly, as best you can, you read it at the beginning, but it was kind of a marathon or a sprint, actually, what the variances are for. Thank you.
Everybody approved your design.
It may not work.
The design adjustments and variances for this. So the design adjustments have to do with the driveway spacing requirement.
And so they're
that-
too close on Martin Street, is that what that is?
There's
for?
actually 9 different design adjustments for driveways.
Okay.
Because of spacing. Because the standard is 200 feet, and they're asking for variety of different ones. Some really close, some a little wider.
And specifically the ones on McDowell right after Martin.
Yeah, the ones for driveway between each other are design adjustments, but variances are for the ones that are between the streets and the driveways.
Yeah.
So that, of course, is the, the variance, you have to prove, hardship, that sort of thing. So it's a higher bar on that.
Those are the big ones in my mind. And are those the ones from Martin,
Yeah,
McDowell
from basically the
intersection
streets, yeah.
and Salisbury?
And depending on the classification of the streets, either 150 or 200 feet. So in this case, I can't remember which one's which, but yeah, they're gonna need either 150 or 200 feet from the corner.
Right in, right out or something.
Yeah. So they're looking at 4 or 5 on that.
Design adjustments or variances?
Variances on that one from the streets, so.
Well, it's just because it's such a busy street, it's just interesting to understand how that works and if it will impact the design.
I mean, if they get denied, it certainly impacts the design. If they get approved, I guess that's what we've got.
Right.
What else, Lee?
So they're also looking for variances from the minimum building height requirements for street-facing building facades, and variances to the height encroachment allowances for the purpose of permitting an enclosed stair access and elevator penthouse. And then back to design adjustments, They're asking for an adjustment to retain existing right-of-way widths to surrounding streets, and also design adjustment from the requirement that they provide cross-access to abutting lots.
Okay, thank you. All right. So let's talk Build 2 first, if you're up for it. Specifically, thoughts on Build 2?
Can I just ask one, just how does it normally work with that process in terms of us seeing these projects during these other approval processes, or, you know, how does that impact what we decide today? And
I mean, I think it has a big impact on these requests. Not so much the building massing and the Build 2. I mean, those are things I think you're prescribing a certain variant, alternate for. But I think it would have a lot to do with your pedestrian access and your transparency, because that could shift.
Right.
But we've had cases that have come back to you because design has changed, and they're asking for a greater Build 2 or the difference beyond kind of a normal adjustment. So cases might have to come back. If they get approval here and they don't get it at the variance, they have to come back, and they could be coming back.
but it's typical to do this process in tandem with those other, okay,
Typically, the variances are worked out in advance of these.
okay,
Because you can apply for a variance before you actually put a building permit in, or,
right.
site plan, so.
Everybody good? Build 2, ready to go. So for me, personally, with the Build 2, I think in general, they've done a really good job holding the building massing to the street edge, to the corners, and pretty much every piece of space that's not building in Build 2 is an amenity area in Build 2, except the parking garage entrance, and a little bit of drive to that center thing. So I mean, I don't think personally I could ask for a better.
They're real close.
It's very close, and they're meeting the administrative
And with
findings.
the addition of the amenity area, which is a real amenity area, thank you for that. We're at 91%.
Yeah.
Minimum required 80%.
All right. So I'm going to ask a procedural question, Carter. Do we want to actually, again, because I'm assuming that we're going to ask the applicant to come back at some point with additional information and maybe even with revisions and things, is there a need for us to actually go through and do findings on it, since we've already determined that they're all kind of interrelated and contingent on seeing?
You don't
it
have
again?
to. I think on one hand, approving them all at once might be good. Because they could be, you could approve 2 out of the 4. They might still sit on Ken's desk. But they're, you have 2 weeks to come back. Beyond that, we'll need to re-advertise for it. So.
I'd like to see them all back after
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
To review it as a whole.
Yeah.
And there's,
after they meet with
Because it can
adjustments.
change.
All right, so we'll hold
What
on.
adjustments make
I think you can give them a sense of what you're good with.
I think our comments are, I think the comments will be very important to them
Yeah.
on each one of these.
Well, absolutely. That's
Yeah.
why, I mean, I think with this one, what I heard us just say is that, yay, Build 2. You're doing a great job. We think you're doing
Okay.
what you need to do. So I don't think, from a Build 2 standpoint, we're asking for changes, right?
Okay, I thought.
But I echo what you're saying. They definitely, on each of the
Yeah.
ones, we need to run through it so they hear comments, so they're responding to
Okay,
something.
got it.
Agreed.
yeah,
Can I just
for
ask
sure.
one more question about Build 2? This may be for Lee or Carter. Are these Build 2s based on the requested City of Raleigh right-of-way dedication that they're asking for a variance on? Or are they, because they're asking for a variance for right-of-way that exist, right-of-way.
Yeah, that's a design adjustment, and that's a pretty solid argument because it's not part of the Christmas plan.
Yeah.
We're not going to ask them to widen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Retain existing
it's
right-of-way.
based on the current right-of-way and their property line. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Formality, probably, more than anything, yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to pedestrian access. I think that's our next one. All right. So from an intent standpoint, I'm going to read it again just to keep it fresh in our minds. The street-facing entrance regulations are intended to concentrate pedestrian activity along the street edge and provide an easily identifiable and conveniently located entrance for residents, visitors, and patrons accessing the building as pedestrians from the street. And access points should be located or identified in a manner that's visible to the pedestrians from the street and be accessible via a direct path. So, from my perspective, we have a little bit of a hard time meeting the intent because of the quantity of utility-type things that are located along Martin Street.
And they mentioned that in the presentation as well. Because of the activity there, there's not as many points to have a pedestrian access point on Martin specifically. And I, for one, would like to see more cut sheets or some type of visual with regards to what these entryways are going to appear. We saw the one that was illuminated that John commented on there at the end of the street, but I'd like to see the entry for the apartment, the entry for the secondary retail that's not on the courtyard side. A bit more information would be.
I think your question better than just an elevation drawing, right? Something that's more
Correct.
like a
Rendering.
a view
Yes.
that shows you down the street that doesn't
Yes.
put trees in front of utility spaces, so we can really read and understand percentages and.
I mean, it's not possible, but I'd like to see how it would feel if I walked down Martin Street. That would be ideal. Because it's
And
a-
then the one entrance on Salisbury, I think we had a couple questions about.
I think in addition to that, something that I would love to be able to wrap my head around is, I would get some clarity from a diagram that got the surrounding blocks, showed me where people were coming from and how they were getting to the building. Just simple arrows showing the entrances, bus stops, other places where people are gonna obviously be coming from, and then we can get an idea of where people are moving
And I think
onto the site.
from a pedestrian safety standpoint, especially as we consider vehicular, especially backing out of, these trash areas, knowing, I think it's already, for me, from a safety standpoint, it's already problematic because I don't see how you can back out with pedestrians and have a safe pedestrian experience, especially twice within a certain amount of time, and the garage.
And have cars, try to get out, And an Uber stop, oh, yeah.
Trash, so I think it's like you back in.
That's in their design adjustment, is
Okay.
they're requesting to be able to do that.
Oh.
Okay, so
Got
this
it.
may
That's what they
be,
do now, right?
see, this may be something we don't have a discussion about.
Back out?
Back in, that's what News and River does now.
Well, we can still have the discussion from pedestrian access.
We may have no control of it right now.
I think for a pedestrian standpoint, the interior of the site too is tricky because I think it's asking a lot to be a hotel circulation, essentially a fire lane, sort of a cut-through street. There's retail parking, there's retail, it's an amenity area. I think the odds of all 5 or 6 of those things being done successfully all the time is a lot to ask. It seems like a challenge, and especially from the pedestrian standpoint, just thinking about cities in general and pedestrian patterns, asking people to divert their walking path off of the street through a site and then back onto a street is not typical. I don't know that I've seen a successful example of that. Lee maybe, or Carter maybe know examples of these interior plazas done really well in another city. I don't know that I've personally experienced one where I've wanted to go out of my way off the main street and
And I
kinda
will
come
say
back.
Nash Square helps a little bit with that, right? That
Mhm.
one frontage on McDowell, there is more permeability.
City Market functions a little bit.
It does.
A little bit.
It does.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It does.
Also
Yeah.
had issues.
What's that?
City markets also had plenty of issues.
Oh, yeah.
It's, it's an internal, John would be able to tell us better, retail and how it would do internally.
Yeah.
They've done very well, good job doing an internal focused
Yeah,
project, but there are aspects that
or challenging.
are
I mean, it's
challenging.
clearly challenging, but I'd love to see that plaza be like, the alternative route. I mean, you say go out of your way, I would like to say that's the way they chose to go if they curated it right. And I think that's what they're trying to do. In lieu of, they've got to put it somewhere, that they've chosen to put it on Martin Street. How can we make it as least, obtrusive or standoffish or dark, and celebrate the other side, which is what I think they're trying to do. And I think that's that's the challenge here.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're much more able to probably, from my experience in 20 years in retailing, is create all that together in that pot on the private plaza, which really is public. I know it's private, but it's serves the public. And because if you start putting the industrial, quote unquote, side to that side, then it really makes things extremely complicated. Like, it's all got to go together traditionally for that to be pulled off in a smart fashion. And that's what that's why they're here, right? So that's, I'm of the opinion that you put it all in one and the other, and it just so happens you're trying to go through the property. And I think that's what makes this property unique and cool, but it's hard to pull off. I get it, but it's
And unfortunately, right now, because we're talking about pedestrian access, it's
right.
creating
That's
some
right.
pretty
That's right.
unsafe.
Yeah. No,
conditions
I get the comments.
that have to be. I mean, they have to be resolved just from a safety standpoint.
Yeah.
All right. What other feedback can we give that's helpful on pedestrian access? So we've requested some pedestrian diagrams. We've requested a visual, whether it be a rendering or a better drawing or something, of the Martin Street elevation unobstructed by trees and things, just so you can really see it. Is there other information that we need? I would like to request that they study different configurations that puts part of that back of house stuff on the interior side and part of it on the exterior. And I think, just rotating that rectangle of space could do that. But again, there's programmatic implications and size of retail, and there's lots of things that I can just sit here and say that. But it would be nice to see some studies so that, there was an attempt made to reduce the negative impact on Martin Street. And maybe there's a way with that it could also help at least not have to back out of the trash, if you could pull through or something. I don't know.
I think Salisbury is looking pretty good from my standpoint. The alternate requests around the big box retail, having one entrance, I think is fine. I think having that type of retail with this type of development will actually be really supportive, and having a pretty continuous frontage on Salisbury across from the retail that's already there, I think is going to do really well. To John's point, maybe seeing some more detail around that entrance of the overhang or the kind of entrance to the plaza. Just we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We don't have to figure it out all now, but is there a little bit more detail that we could see there just to make it clear the pedestrian experience of that part?
Part of the pedestrian experience findings is like how visible is the entrance and what's at least a little bit of the character of it. So I think that's a very good request.
I'm sure this has been taken into consideration, but with the Martin Street, if we do end up having the utility area remain where it is, I'd like to know what it's going to feel like at night, because the mention of the retail space and the natural light that will come from the glass windows on the street, and then we're going to have a dark spot potentially. That might be a bit overkill, but I would like to know how that's going to feel for close to 200 feet in that block, if it is going to be dark or if it's going to be illuminated.
So last question for Lee. In these precedents, is this the first project where the amenity area internally has also been a vehicle corridor with parking?
I believe so.
Okay.
With parking, for sure.
I think that on one of the Smoky Hollow projects,
Yeah.
I think that it had the potential for vehicle access in like an emergency situation. But
No
it's
parking.
It's all been pedestrian focused.
Okay. So, yeah, just interested in the precedent. I mean, obviously, this project's unprecedented in several ways, and we're going to learn as we go along as we see more of these types of projects. But I think it's just worth thinking about for us as a group, the precedent for future projects, and does an amenity area with traffic running through it, is that providing the same amenity area as just retail, or as I think there's plenty of examples where street traffic brings street life and is more successful for retail. I think it's just a matter of being thoughtful about how it's done.
Well, materials will help that a lot too. And maybe we could better understand what the materials are. But if it was more of an alley that was, it's the difference between a street and kind of more of an alley that's used temporarily, or something that can be blocked off on the weekends and have a big gathering, block party or something, which could be cool. But, you know, a lot of that has to do with materials and the feel of it. It's not just a road. I mean, I wouldn't want to think of it as a road going through there.
Yeah. The plan
Rendering doesn't look like a road.
The plan, yeah, the rendering shows it all in one plane, no curb and gutter. But the plan shows it
Curb and gutter.
looking like more of a road.
Yeah.
That's
So
a
maybe we
good
can just
point.
better
That's a
understand
question.
that.
That's a good question.
But I think what I'm also hearing, if we're giving feedback, is that the more that can be not curb and gutter, not a traditional road,
Right.
the more that it's an aesthetic, that it's, yes, you might drive and there might be, you know, differentiation in the pavement or something that tells you where to drive and where not to drive. But I think to make it a plaza space
I agree with that.
could be beneficial.
The changing material, for sure.
And that helps it be an amenity space.
Yes.
Well, I think that helps change my mind a little bit about the use of maybe detouring and going on this route off of, you know, then, you know, it maybe makes the other block not quite so bad. Still not great.
That's pretty
but-
bad.
Yeah.
But better, you know, maybe it does change my mind about how I walk, and maybe I take a few steps further. And
Especially if there was a great retailer in
if
there
it's-
you wanted
yeah,
to stop
and
at.
if it's a great space, I mean, I'd do it all the time.
Well,
Right.
one thing to note is like, it's very different leasing an apartment versus selling an apartment. And these guys are doing condos, and that's gonna require some elevated finishes just to sell those things. And so I think we ought to keep that in mind, that
The quality has to
I
be
think the
there.
quality's gonna be there because they've gotta sell a large amount of real estate here, so.
Yeah.
Good point.
I was just gonna say, from the pedestrian standpoint too, just the question of parking, which is the reason I asked about earlier, is, you know, that means there's gonna be a lot of cars coming through. They're just looking for one of these 9 spots, and probably most of the time they're gonna be full, which is great for retail. We know parking is good for retail. I think the question is, how much traffic does that generate of, you know, the Seinfeld, like, circling and looking for parking, right? Concentric circles around a spot. And I think, I don't know, we don't need to do a full traffic study or anything like that, but it's just, I think it's worth considering how much additional traffic just people looking for those spots might generate in this area that's also supposed to be pedestrian amenity.
Well, and just the vehicular access that requires, the volume of traffic does impact safety of pedestrians along, you know, both the McDowell Street and the Salisbury Street sides of it.
Yeah. Especially because folks are going pretty fast on McDowell,
Yeah, they are.
turning into there, trying to get out of the way. But I feel like we'll probably see some thing change with that, and I'd love to see it back when some of these variances and design adjustments are figured out. So we're not just looking at something that may not even be.
I think that's a very good point. All right, so let's move on to transparency. So I'm going to read the intent again, because I think this is one of the key elements, just like pedestrian access is for this project. The transparency requirements are intended to lend visual interest to street-facing building facades for both pedestrians and building occupants, and minimize blank wall areas. So, again, I don't think I have any problems with that. I don't know how you guys feel about it, other than that one Martin Street facade.
Agree.
And maybe that just gets clarified with more of this visual imagery that we're gonna.
I agree.
I think it can.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good.
And again, one of the findings on it, if I can get there, is that the street-facing building facade uses other architectural treatments to create visual interest and offset the reduction in transparency. But to add to Corey's comment earlier, I think active uses that are somehow contiguous with the retail space that starts to pull that activity down that street side to help cover up and conceal the fact that
Could be simple.
it could be simple moves that really make the street not so dead. All right. Okay. Building massing. There's a little bit to talk about on this one, I think, just from the complexity of the jogs and where the step backs happen and how that plays with the setbacks and sheer corners and things like that. Does somebody else want to start talking about that one? Or do you want me to go first?
The combination of step backs and setbacks, how do we want to approach that?
Well, for me, where they exist together, so I was trying to get to that diagram, where they exist together, I think some good synergy starts to happen.
We have the 15-foot minimum, and there's one that's 17.7, I believe.
So again, I'm going to hold this up and I'm going to pantomime here. You know, this zone that's got just a little bit, but it's in excess of the requirement, like, I don't take any issue with any of that. This, because it does have a greater setback associated with it, I don't take as much issue with. So really what we're talking about is this corner, which also has a setback to offset the lack of step-back. So that's something to talk about.
Talking about the strong corner.
But it's really the strong corner, I think, that we all have to.
I think the difference, yeah, and John brought this up a minute ago, you know, the difference, you know, with the retail, some of the projects we looked at before with the retail in the corners, and they had these strong corners as well, and they kind of set a precedence, which I think is fine. The difference to me was at the ground level, it had a little bit more of a step in where it created more of a area plaza feel on that corner than just bringing that to the corner. And
Yeah,
this
they
has
got
a
the
little
height
bit
to
of
do it
step back.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think they do.
Well, they have, but it's not, it didn't look like a huge amount to me. I don't-
Well, I
What
remember
page
from
are you
adding
on?
it up, it's basically a 20-foot wide sidewalk, which is.
So it's 16 standard, but is that only
and then
4 foot
And then they
recessed
added
or
4.
Yeah, so,
underneath?
I mean, again, I
Yeah,
think
4
5.
four's not much.
the precedent,
That's
yeah,
the
down the,
corner,
s-
right?
that we looked at a couple months ago was a much greater kind of plaza corner there that I thought,
Celebrate it more.
I guess I'm
Yeah,
just thinking
at least on
about-
paper, yeah.
I'm thinking about the
Marquee
Dillon,
versus-
right? That's a 16-foot sidewalk going around there. It feels
Huge, it does.
massive. And then you're adding another 5 feet to it. It's like, that's pretty big. I don't know. I feel like that's
Yeah.
really appropriate, but.
Yeah, I would agree if it was just a single grade sidewalk with not much going on. I think what they did with the Fallon project, they had steps going up to like another
That's different.
elevated thing with tables, so yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's different.
I don't have an
I
issue with
love
like
this
holding
corner.
the corner and mass. I mean, I think
Yeah, I think
if you
this is
set it
awesome.
back too much, it starts to erode and we have
Fades
other
out.
issues, so.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I like this corner. think
I
that's-
appreciate the lower setback on Martin Street too, the third floor setback. It's
Agreed.
more in your pedestrian view than seventh floor or something.
And the ones that are shaded red, like, maybe I'm not understanding this right. Carter and Lee, jump in on this. Those are just, they're 3 feet above the required height. Is that how that was working, or?
Say again,
Sorry, I'm looking at.
you're talking about,
Look at that
okay,
one.
when they mentioned that there's a step back and a notch, but it's above the, like the 8th floor
It was like 3
max,
feet
yeah.
above.
Yeah, and you've seen things similar to that before.
Yeah.
That's only applicable to this first red.
it's just the one building.
I mean, they're trying to.
Yeah,
enhance
Martin
that
Street,
as
so.
too, but-
Yeah, and that's just one story above that.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
not.
Nobody's
it's
ever
not
gonna
the-
see that.
Yeah.
That means
Yeah.
nothing to me.
So I think the question is just collectively, because of the way the findings are worded, do we feel like the kind of carving into the building that they've proposed as it stands offsets the kind of sheer wall? Because the things that we're supposed to be reviewing for.
I
are-
definitely do. I mean, I think there's enough uniqueness there, enough
There's undulation
dynamics
all over the
cutting in
building.
that, yeah, I mean, it's,
All the buildings have
think-
undulation all over them.
you're right, the intent, they've solved the intent.
I would agree, yeah.
Good.
I think it's great.
Good.
And I will say initially, I was concerned about that it did not extend from the Martin Street and the Salisbury Street corner. It didn't extend, that setback didn't extend the entire blockway, but with the additional ebb and flow, it's good.
Yeah. Creates a little energy, I think. That's great.
Yeah, architects, we're not fans of wedding cakes and,
No,
No.
I don't like them.
they're not very, they're
I
not very
wanted
attractive.
something right here. I wanted
Yeah.
something right here, but it's good.
Okay, so from a commentary standpoint, it sounds to me like we might want a little bit more information on that corner, the eroded corner at the base.
See a little bit more,
Okay.
yeah.
And just more
But,
visual.
you know, to understand a little bit more.
I mean, they're gonna go
But I
back
think above it's great.
and look at all that Martin Street experience. I mean, I would imagine, so just talk about those corners too,
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah.
Is there any other information? I mean, I think generally, I think we all feel good about it otherwise from the building massing. Okay. All right, so I'm looking at you, Carter. Is this a defer situation to get more
I would
information?
say you're at least deferring it 2 weeks, yeah.
Okay, all right.
And by that time, we will have additional information, correct?
We will.
Okay.
There is a second AC meeting in December, right?
Yeah, the 19th. Yeah, the
But
January
not-
2nd is the one you
That's
wanted to
right.
take
Yeah.
off.
You want to ask?
When would they need to have you information?
We would need to have it probably within a week or so. I mean, we typically try to at least meet with the chair and the vice chair the Friday before or so. So we can,
I guess it's up to them to see if they can meet that. You know, they got about a week to get a lot of information.
Well, and
Yeah.
especially given, we may need to, I mean, everything's going to depend on those variances, right?
Monday.
Yeah,
So,
maybe, but
okay, so I think we'll go through, do I hear a motion for deferral?
Oh, motion to defer.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, from the applicant standpoint, is there any questions that anybody might want to ask about that?
Thanks. I think we heard most of it. Just to put in a kind of wrap it up, I think so probably several more views of street level.
Please.
Martin, probably the plaza also, and just kind of Salisbury while we're at it, and kind of
Yes.
work our way around the base of the building. It sounds like that'll answer a lot of the questions if we do that in a
More real-time finishes as well,
yeah,
please.
in a higher like this rendering here, but at street
And not
level.
so much trees,
Yeah. Okay.
just so we can see what's going on.
Okay. Okay. And then.
I mean, it's creative, there's trees.
We like your
that.
trees. We just want to see what's
That's
behind
right.
them.
And then anything else we can do to show, but anything else we'd care to do to mitigate Martin and what's going on there in Martin, okay?
Please.
Anything else in terms of additive information that I missed?
That circulation diagram.
Circulation, bus.
Pedestrian, vehicular,
Yep.
yeah, what's
Kind of all
going
that
on.
together.
Include if there's a dedicated Uber stop, put that on there. Anything that's going to include a car or a person.
Okay.
Stick that on there,
This
please.
is a really dumb diagram, but I just wanted to show you since I showed everybody else. So right now, the kind of dead space for whatever on this building is oriented that way. I don't know that it works, it's probably stupid, but anyway, just
Right.
if there was a way to make it
To rotate it 90 degrees.
shared.
Right.
You know, and it may not
we
make
were
any
talking
sense.
similarly. There may be
Yeah.
a way to push it in a little bit and bring the retail kind of around in front of it.
Exactly,
something like that.
exactly, and whatever
Yeah.
creative ways you can come up with, just to make it not a dead zone.
Okay. And refresh my memory, Carter, the deferment meeting is which date?
December 9th.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to go into the detail of kind of the different scenarios of how much retail could we put on Martin versus not. You know, what's realistic for you all and for the project. But maybe there's like a plan A, plan B kind of thing, or one where it's just mitigating the circulation that's there right now, one where you can shift a little more retail, one where you can shift part of it. But obviously there's a lot of trade-offs from all different angles for the project, and so it may be helpful to just see a couple different scenarios. You don't have to commit to one or the other yet, but it may give us some options to look at as well. That's helpful for you.
Good. I think a couple of clarifications I heard, just to clarify, the maneuvering on Martin was back in, head out. So it's backing up to trash, just for clarity. And then the plaza is, it's definitely seen as all paver, curbless, very much plaza. You'd have to struggle more to think of it as a road.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of.
Do you imagine closing that? Is it going to be able to be closed for?
It certainly could be for events. Yeah, it certainly could be. We hadn't really thought through all the operational variations. It probably has a lot of different lives, depending on the day of the week.
I hope so.
Okay.
But thank you for
Yeah.
all the effort. It's a really exciting project.
Great. No, I think the feedback was great. We appreciate the kind of the direction is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on. Ready.
The next one's going to be like, hi, we're here, we like flowers.
Yeah.
Because it's,
Look, just for
it's not
comparison,
much
like, these are
time
my
given
notes.
all
Not
the
that
other
it's a
things
lot, but
they're
like,
learning.
This is all, I mean,
They get thrown a curveball. Right, they get thrown a curveball. And I'm designed, yes.
No, but this is the,
Is everybody now okay on the bathroom break?
Okay.
Should we just keep going?
I'm good.
Okay. Okay. I'm okay. But I want to. All right.
Now he's gonna have to go back.
You ready?
Okay. AAD 2419, 8 West P Street, also known as the Seaboard Station. The applicant is requesting 2 administrative alternates, 1 pedestrian access and the other transparency. I'm not going to go through all the details of the pedestrian access and transparency requirements, but the request is for nearly an acre Seaboard Station. I think it's their first phase. Zone DX7 urban general frontage. Site surrounded by 4 streets: Peace, Halifax, Seaboard, and Seaboard Station. It's completely surrounded by streets. Proposing 2 buildings for the development on the eastern and western portions. In terms of urban general frontage, the street-facing entrances are required at a maximum of 75 feet along primary streets. In this case, Peace Street is the only designated primary street, so that's the only one they need to meet this requirement for. Yeah, I think in our staff report, we didn't have all the information yet, but it mentions we didn't know which ones they were, but they are Peace Street. So it would need to meet it on that street alone. In terms of the findings, it needs to meet the intent of the street-facing regulations. 2, the approved alternate conforms with the comp plan and adopted city plans. Number 3, pedestrian access points are easily identifiable by pedestrian, customer, and visitors. Number 4, recessed or projected entries or building elements have been incorporated into the design of the building to enhance visibility of the street-facing entrance. And 5, the pedestrian route from the street and bus stops and other modes of public transportation is safe, convenient, and direct. The other request, as I mentioned before, is for transparency. Transparency is measured between 0 and 12 feet above the adjacent sidewalk for the ground floor, and then per floor on the upper floors. 50% of that transparency must be located between 3 and 8 feet of the building facade. In this case, mixed-use buildings are proposed that require 66% transparency on the ground floor, between 0 and 12 feet. Upper story is 20%, and transparency is not applicable to residential uses, which comes into play here because a portion of the eastern building is residential in nature. So they do have a portion of it that is slated for retail, so that portion of the building would need to meet the requirements. Staff report does mention that we didn't have all the information, but we do now in terms of that. So transparency would need to be met essentially fully on 3 sides of the building, of the site, as well as a portion of that residential building. So I think the applicant can give a little more detail in terms of the numbers, but I'm happy to answer any questions right now.
All right. If there are no questions, will the applicant please step forward? And I'm just going to remind you, please try to keep your presentation to 10 minutes.
Yes, ma'am.
We'll talk with you a lot more afterwards, I promise.
Okay. I'm Don Nicholas from Klein Design. I'm the architect. This is Joe.
I'm Joe Pung from Stewart, landscape architect, 318 Acorn Hollow Place, Durham, North Carolina.
Here we have Seaboard Station Parcel A. I'll turn it over to Ross to explain the site.
Can I ask a quick procedural question? Did you state your address by any chance?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do that. I'm sorry.
Klein Design, 125 North Harrington Street.
Awesome. Thanks.
So we'll quickly kind of run through the agenda. I'm going to talk about the site overview, and then Don will step in and kind of go over the actual alternates. Run through the site overview quickly and maybe skip a few slides so we can kind of get this through quicker. So this is our site. It's part of Seaboard Station development here. It's just north of downtown Raleigh. Along the west side, we have Capitol Boulevard. This train tracks, a CSX line with Logan's, sort of a garden shop to the left, to the west side. And then on the east is William Peace University. Block A is part of a larger development. It's in sort of an older existing development with several different constraints, which we'll go over a little bit later. So we have Seaboard Avenue to the north, Halifax Street to the east, P Street, which is the primary street, to the south, and then Seaboard Station Drive to the west. One of the constraints of the site are the slopes. We're at about, this is the highest point of the site at about 328 at Seaboard Avenue and Halifax Street, and then it generally slopes diagonally down to Seaboard Station Drive and Peace Street intersection at around 311. So there are some pretty significant grade changes along the elevations of the building. Also have a Duke Energy transmission line that comes down Halifax Street and then cuts over the north side of the site, which causes a few more additional constraints. So also part of the plan, we're proposing there will be street trees and planting strips along these 3 streets, and then along Seaboard Avenue there will be shorter, smaller trees and movable planters and site furnishings, things like that. A couple of existing images. The proposed Block A is currently occupied by the Sunflower Cafe, shown here. And then if you're looking up Seaboard Station Drive, you can start to see the slope here. And then at Seaboard Station Avenue, and you can see the drive sloping down this way, as well as this Duke Energy transmission line here. And then just a couple more pictures of the existing streetscape. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Don.
So we're looking to create a vibrant mixed-use development and thoughtfully add to the urban fabric of Raleigh. The building, I'm going to start at the lower level. We have 2 lower levels of parking submerged. And I'll go through the floor plans. Here's the lowest level of parking submerged, followed by the lower lobby of the hotel and the rest of the parking. This hatch here represents where the grade falls and meets the building. The ground floor, our first floor, we have 2 buildings, the hotel wing on the west and the residence wing on the east. In this space, we have the hotel amenity area, the retail to the north on the residence side, and the residence portion of the east side to the south, with a shared amenity in between. You can look at these symbols here. These show where all the pedestrian entries are and all the vehicular access points into the building are. Moving up the building, the hotel typical floor plan and the residence typical floor plan. And the top level rooftop restaurant. We provided some images to show the streetscape that we're after. This is looking at the hotel entry on Seaboard Ave. We control both sides of the street. We're looking to provide, like Joe said, trees and an invitable streetscape. Here's a larger image of that. You have the residence to the left in the image and the hotel to the right. Here's back where the transmission line for the Duke pole would be. The left side is the residence and the right side is the hotel. This is from Peace in Halifax. To the right is the residence, and to the left is the hotel. And you can kind of see the grade drop off significantly in this image. And this is on Peace and Seaboard Drive. And you can also see the significance of the grade that we're dealing with on this side. Down here is where the lower lobby is. And up here is the first floor ground level. And then up here starts the hotel typical levels. We're looking for 2 alternates, transparency and pedestrian access. We have 2 diagrams here. Originally, we were looking at the UDO based off the ground story of transparency calculations, and we determined that the ground story was the first floor, the first full story above grade. Correspondence 2 days ago, we added another diagram to show that calculation from the street sidewalk. With the first option, the first diagram, you can see that we meet the transparency requirement, but the problem was the transparency between 3 and 8. We're just a little bit under. The second diagram shows, because of the sloping site, that most of the transparency calculation falls within the floor line, and the plenum space. With the 3 to 8 foot range on this, we're a little bit closer to 50% than with the one above. Here's just another diagram of where we've taken the calculation. On this south side, Peace Street facade. The real factors working against us here are the grade. Here is the Seaboard Station Drive side. We did the same thing with the diagrams. The one full story above grade is a little bit off from meeting the requirements because of the entry into the parking deck and the loading dock. With the lower diagram, the slope of the street again prohibits us from meeting the requirement. And here's just another diagram of where we calculated transparency. For the Seaboard Ave side, where the Duke Energy easement is, where all the retail is, for the hotel, we meet the requirement for transparency, but we do not meet the requirement for the 3 to 8 foot requirement. And for the retail area on the residence side, we're just under the requirement. We're going for, you can see to the left the president image that we're going for the detailing at the street to create more of a warehouse industrial feel for this building. To Halifax Street down here is the same type of language as described for the Seaboard Ave side, and we're just underneath the transparency requirement. The second alternate that we're looking for is pedestrian access, and we're required to provide street-facing entrances within 75 feet of primary street. With this street, we're really limited with where we can place access points into the building because of the slope and the grade. We have one point here in the center of the two buildings, and then we have another point right here into the hotel that leads to this door here. These are both recessed entry points. The first entry point over here is 75 feet, plus or minus, plus a little bit, just around 75 feet. And the other entrance is 100 feet from the others. Any questions?
16 feet.
I think after our last case, we're out of questions. We'll call you back up if we have questions as we go, okay?
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, is there anyone here to speak from the public? No, okay, we're gonna table it and talk. So what are your thoughts?
My first thought is, there, on the P Street side at the hotel entry, there's this thin site wall thing that's making the pedestrian go down to the corner and then come back to the door.
Is that managing grades? Is that what they're trying
Is
to
that,
do?
yeah, I'm wondering if they can just
Hanging
put
off
some
of that
stairs or
retaining wall.
something right here, or, because this is also adding to their lack of transparency. Kind of-
It's a barrier,
Yeah,
yeah.
I just wonder if that's an opportunity to get two birds, one stone.
Which drawing, what number are you on?
Last page.
Yeah,
Last page, all right.
and then
Yeah.
on the,
Yes.
where in the middle there, you can see a plan view of it, just kind of sticking out there. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to increase your
If it's a
transparency.
safety thing, maybe it could be that they put rails up instead of a retaining wall,
Yeah, yeah, and,
if it's a safety issue.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that was my first thought.
I mean, the grade on this project is, that's the challenge. That is the challenge. And I think they've done a great job, from the standpoint of transparency, increasing when they could to overcompensate for where they can't.
Yeah. And I do think, I want to say this, it's a whole different project than the last one that we saw because it's the whole block, but it's still an internal kind of courtyard element that's set up that's very, pedestrian heavy, but there's really not a lot of dead zone on the exterior of the building, which is
No.
why we're really not even talking about it. So I just wanted to at least say that in comparison to the last case, that's pretty nice.
But the shared amenity is not really, is it public or, I mean,
In this case,
it's more for the hotel?
I think it's more. for
Because like the connection to the, I mean, is pretty minimal.
Yeah, but even our
connection.
amenity areas, like the technical ones,
Yeah.
aren't required to be public.
Yeah, it's on the Seaboard
Right,
Station Drive.
yeah.
But you're right, it's not a plaza, it's not
That's why they
open
don't have
to
any pedestrian access on this side.
Right.
everyone.
They don't have to.
It's not a main street, so we don't get to talk about it.
And the typology of Seaboard is like, there is a lot of seating outside and, there are kind of overlaps of public and private space, so I don't know if we're,
Is that where you done?
oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
Go ahead.
to Adam's point last time, I'm not sure if there's going to be a bus stop on the site or there already is.
I think there is one.
I feel like there is one, right?
Is there one further down by the Shell station?
It's further
There's
down.
like right there. It's
It-
right in front of,
I don't know.
yeah.
in front of,
Yeah.
Sunflower.
It's right in front of the building, right?
Yeah.
That's what I
Right
thought.
in front of Sunflowers?
Yeah, that's what I
Okay.
thought. So,
There's one down at Shell.
Well, they can tell us for sure, but I think,
Yeah.
I think they-
Please tell us.
There's one right on P Street.
that's right.
Stop parking.
no.
What's that?
It's very different, isn't it?
No, that's, it's,
So we've actually put it right
Right
here.
there. Yeah, cool.
So our challenge is we have to frame it with the administrative alternates that we're reviewing.
I also heard question about outdoor seating.
Did you see it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right.
Yeah, I think P Street's the biggest question for me, similar to Martin last time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
they
it's
wanted
kind
to
of a
bring these together.
blank
Yeah.
wall, not much entrance going on right now. It's facing downtown. We've had a lot of proposals for the site south of that and for large-scale redevelopment. It's going to be more active from a transportation standpoint with all the development going in
Absolutely.
on P Street. So I don't know if it's even, if it's another case where you kind of want retail to be on that street versus the north side, or if that's even a conversation that we could have. But I think the amenity area also feels a little internalized, like it's not super visible from the street since it's narrow and then opens up and inside and narrows again. So those are things that jump out to me, just that it's mostly a continuous wall without much access, and there's an opportunity with a bus stop right there and with surrounding residential in the blocks east and west of there to really have it be a welcoming destination from that facade, where it doesn't feel like it's necessarily getting that right now. John and I were talking about that, there's a ton of retail inside the site, right? So the question is it better to put all the retail on the inside, or is it better to have hotel and residential entrances kind of complementing the retail on the north, and then put more retail on the south that attracts, kind of connects the
Trick,
other
like,
side?
is it,
Yeah.
you can see it, but you can't get to it. And traditionally, the ones you can get to are the ones that succeed.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, even if
So
there's,
you like it like this? Is that what you're saying?
You're saying move more retail towards the street.
Now, I
That was just
think
your
back up
commentary.
the hill is probably where it
Where
will
it's gonna be
succeed.
successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what they had forever.
but even if you have the required doorways, it's like, what is the activity level given the slope? And, slope is difficult, but there are, I think, ways of kind of, making it more of an active facade on the street side. And that, I mean, a lot of people drive on Wilmington Street every day coming out of, this is a pretty prominent, I mean, every
already- it's
project
already
and block is
congested.
important in our city, but this is, this is front and center.
I mean, this is purely an opinion.
I'm all ears.
I think the architecture's less than exciting. And I think, for me, you're not doing yourself any favors. And so I think it's hard to sort of, bend on some of these things from my perspective, just because it's like, well, I don't know if I want to bend for that. You know what I mean? And so I think programmatically, things seem to be in the right spot. I think you've handled the grade as best you can. I think architecturally and stylistically, it's not hitting it. So, and we are the appearance commission, and so I'm commenting on the appearance of this building as it relates to some of the requests. So I don't know what else.
You want to do?
I mean, we can
anything?
dive into the details,
Yeah.
but that's just sort of a blanket statement that,
I couldn't agree more, and I totally agree with that, and I think Adam brought up a point early on along with that, and I think there are some moves to even create an entry that was inviting and welcoming would kill a couple birds right there by getting more glass and more something, a canopy, some more glass, instead of a retaining wall. And, there are ways to work, we tend to go, oh yeah, the grades, but I mean, there's plenty of buildings around this world that, you can,
Built in the mountains.
you can change floor heights inside of buildings all the time. But yeah, I agree with the architecture, and I think just, you know, maybe just making it some more inviting might actually, you know, we can't tell them how to do their building, but we can, but the things that we can control, with the amount of glass and openings and stuff, I think making it more inviting and pedestrian friendly to actually want to go and visit this place.
All right, so let's drill down, because I want to, you know, give feedback that can be tied to what we've got and can be actionable, so
Yeah.
they understand what we mean. I think you're,
And I'm specifically talking about
the entrance.
the entrance of the hotel on Peace and Seaboard Station Drive. You
And
know,
I-
there's a small wall there.
It needs to be celebrated.
Bathrooms are on the other side of that wall right there, so there's no glass. I think if that wall is gone, if there was a little bit different entry facade, I think that they would be there with their percentage of glass openings.
And with also the request for the pedestrian access
Right.
allowance, it needs to be absolutely celebrated.
Right.
If we're going down by 1 or 2 access points, we need to make the ones that are available massive.
Special.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I think you guys are right on.
Say from the pedestrian standpoint, I think how we think about these amenity areas is going to be important going forward. If we end up with a lot of projects that are using the entrance to an amenity area to satisfy some of the requirements, but then the amenity area isn't designed in a way that serves its purpose. Like I don't necessarily see a lot of people coming from P Street and going through this area, or coming from the other side. Just from a circulation standpoint, I don't see a lot of reason to go in there. It's going to be shaded by all the buildings around it. Maybe that's good in the summer, but you know, the design intent of that space is I think important for it to meet the intent that we're talking about. And it seems like something that's coming up a lot on many different projects.
Well, you can't circulate through, right? Because the pool is fenced inside, or are we gonna?
That's a good
I don't
question.
think
I
you can
couldn't
even
tell
get
from
through the
drawing.
building.
Oh, okay.
But no, to your
Right.
sort of
Is there
the
a
same
pool?
point. There is a pool, right? No?
I don't know. There's a rectangle at the corner,
Yes,
pinch point
I
of
think there
those
was
two.
one in
Oh,
section.
that's what this is right here.
Yeah.
That thing at the pinch point, I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, so there's
Right
gonna
there.
be, it has to be fenced for
Oh, that whole
security
pink
and
area is
safety.
fenced.
Yeah,
This is the public spot.
right, yeah.
That's great. I think that'd be a great space.
On that side.
So I
Yeah.
think
Yeah, yeah.
P Street is really where we want more attention focused.
And I think also Seaboard, I mean, I know Seaboard Station Drive is more vehicular, but there's only one pedestrian access point on the one, if you look at the diagram
Oh,
of,
yeah.
there's only one at the top corner. So
But because it's not a primary street, I guess it doesn't.
it's not required, yeah, but you, I mean,
Brandy, do you feel like there needs to be retail here? Is that what you're
Um,
suggesting?
I don't know that I think that was part of our conversation earlier, like just from an activating the street standpoint, like if there was a way to have a retail something, or, you know, obviously that forces dealing with the grade a little differently, which I think could really benefit P Street. And there is significant grade change on P Street, and, you know, I respect that and understand that's going to be a challenge, but I think the entrance to that public amenity zone needs to somehow, you know, maybe it needs to be a little wider. It needs to have more than just one kind of switchback kind of side of a stair coming down to meet you at the sidewalk. And then if there can be a little more retail along that street edge, I do think that would be beneficial.
From the P Street side, can I ask a question to you? From the P Street side, in the middle entry to the shared amenity, is that ADA accessible? Does it have an ADA accessible access
The amenity entry
on the P Street side?
here,
Is there an elevator?
we just have a stair.
Stairs, okay.
The ADA has to come off of Halifax Street.
Well, I think
Yes, ma'am.
if you're gonna claim that as,
They're gonna come off as Seaboard.
Seaboard, yeah.
if you
But
can
then
If
get
you can
through there.
Can you
Can't get
circulate through the courtyard?
If you get up to the stairs, you can go through the fence, but it's not open for public.
Okay.
So it's 100%
Okay.
private.
Well, what is 100% private? Like, what is public domain from the standpoint of, like, if you're eating at a restaurant or something and coming outside, like, where does that stop?
Let me pull up the floor plan real fast. So here, I'm not sure if it's intended to be public, but it's a restaurant.
Yeah.
Part of the hotel restaurant.
I'm assuming people are gonna go,
Yeah.
I mean, from the city, and then that exterior, zone underneath where the columns are, So this belongs to that, right? But when you come up here, how far, can you get back to there?
You can get back to there until the fence right here.
So this is really the barrier.
Yeah, so that's really the barrier.
So like if I were going as a resident of Raleigh to go eat at the hotel, restaurant or bar or something, you know, we could sit outside and enjoy that space up
Yes,
to
ma'am.
the fence.
Yes.
But there's not a circulation, there's no,
There's no pass-through.
yeah, how do you,
Hmm.
so
You have to go through for ADA, I guess.
from an ADA, you have to enter at the corner, is that true?
Go
To get
through
to the
the
restaurant?
hotel to get out, yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
The other thing that jumps out to me on this diagram is the main residential entrance is on Halifax. It's possible, maybe, that could be rotated around to Peace as well. I don't know if there's a kind of other programmatic reasons why it's on a side street.
Maybe anticipation of
Parking deck.
or
Or
William
grade.
Peace students being the residents, I don't know. I don't know that that's what it would be. It looks too nice for that maybe, but, well.
I don't think you can access, I think it's more to do with grade, but
grade?
I think so. It looks like that in the rendering.
Mm.
Subterranean parking and
Yeah, there too.
It pushes it up too much. Okay. Okay. I think we're pushing towards deferral again?
Yeah.
Is that
Mm-hmm.
what I'm hearing?
I make a motion for deferral.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Applicant, do you want to come and ask questions for clarification for what we might want to see for 2 weeks from now?
Do we have other cases 2 weeks from now as well?
Yeah.
I'm sure we will.
We did not get any submittals for regular cases. We expect to courtesy reviews
Okay,
to come forward on the 19th.
thank you.
Can we discourage them from, can we politely?
2020 is their year.
We expect them to be two significant downtown projects as well.
Oh, good.
Oh, boy.
I'll
We
bring,
should order pizza next
I was
week.
gonna say,
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
What are your recommendations to meet the,
For Peace Street?
yes.
All right.
your retaining wall, where's that?
Yeah,
So,
just improve that hotel entry.
The hotel entry,
on
yeah.
both
I'd
sides.
say just, yeah, looking at the hotel entry and improving the entrance and the circulation
The one
into
that's
that.
below especially.
I think, yeah,
and from one of the elevation drawings, it looked as though there was a retaining wall that extended. And I think.
that was,
Yeah,
And then you have to walk in and around. If we could, oh, I'm sorry. If that was removed and replaced with, I don't know if it's a drop issue, if there's a safety issue, if it needs handrails, if you did vertical open slats of some sort versus the,
Permeable, visually permeable.
yeah, so you can,
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think there's a celebration of that entrance that might need to happen too, besides it just being recessed, just
You
a
guys are
little
in the
bit of
business
something.
of selling meals, right, in the hotel restaurant and selling drinks. And I think that this is a really, really visible street. And I don't think you've done any favors to the business operator on how to operate that hotel from a public standpoint, or at least I'm not seeing it in the renderings. And so I would say from a business perspective, like, you got to get that right. And I think you're kind of ignoring an opportunity here from a business perspective that you could celebrate. And I think you guys can figure this out.
Yeah, so I think here, and I think here are my two big points.
Which ones,
The
Brandy?
here, and here. So this is the plaza.
center left.
And I wonder if this dining that belongs to that might want to be at a different level that's a little closer to the street level. It's something that makes it inviting. You know, I know it would be a step down to get there, but just anything that might help activate it from the street, and to Corey's point, do something that starts to draw interest from the folks on P Street to want to, go eat there.
Vehicular and pedestrian.
And maybe just clarify if this is an accurate representation, because I think like even if you're meeting transparency and there's a lot of glass, it doesn't, the access points are, how do you get into the building? That's what generates, I think, that from our perspective, sort of activity and a welcoming sort of pedestrian environment for a
And I
street.
guess, what sets that floor level for you guys?
The grade, ma'am.
Can you push it higher? Because
No,
I think
ma'am.
that
We're bound by the fire marshal's requirement. Yes,
Because historic overlay, because of that.
for the high-rise code.
it's the high rise, it's the 75-foot
Okay.
max
We're
building codes.
just meeting it.
Because that ultimately, that floor level height is what's making that kind of not work. So maybe there's a way then to make that a double height space or something to make it where it could be,
Glorified the whole corner.
yeah. More visible, more inviting, more celebrated.
I mean, you could have a grand stair there, right, versus the switchback thing. Super simple for you guys to execute. And then on that corner, similar to the previous case, how they were kind of accenting sort of different corners of the architecture, like, that can be done. There's some simple, really easily sort of fundamental architecture stuff that I think you guys can
I mean, this
sort of
is it,
accomplish
that's the
here.
view you're gonna see, I mean, that's
Yeah,
it.
no.
That's it, I mean, that's, yeah, it's prominent,
That's everybody coming out of downtown, getting ready to get on Capitol Boulevard and head north.
yeah.
There's probably 40,000 people a day
At least.
before it's over with.
Yeah, just put on your sales hat a little bit.
And they just left the ugliest Archdale building ever in history.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Give them something to see.
Get some red lights.
All right.
That's all we have. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You guys. All right, good job, everybody.
So I wanted to, before everybody runs away, just take this with you, if you don't mind.
Hey, what was that?
This was something that,
Of all the projects we've seen before.
it's our most,
Summary of what we've just talked
and
about.
and it's mostly for you to kind of keep it in your mind, because I think this is a trend.
It's
that
absolutely a
is
trend.
increasing nationwide. And it's something that, as a city, in the same way that council previously has charged us for high visibility, high impact kind of projects, and thinking this is going to be something that the city might want to get ahead of, because we're going to see more and more cases like it.
You want to
And-
close the session?
That's good.
Oh, do I need to close the session?
No,
We gotta do minutes.
Okay.
5 minutes, yeah.
I also introduced your new
you're
commissioner,
Brian.
Gar Mason, been appointed.
Welcome.
Right into it.
I love a
I know.
splash.
Yes, and welcome.
Cannonball, man, I love it. Love a cannonball.
Did a fine job, Corey. Good job.
He'd have been great during the site plan, the full site plan review days.
That would've been fun.
He'd have been great for
Oh,
that.
Lord.
All right, minutes. Does everybody have a chance to read the minutes?
Saw no changes.
File, sorry.
Approved. Motion to approve minutes from last meeting.
That's why we're here, man.
Nobody's rather than me.
I think well, are we done? No, we're not.
We have to approve the, we're
After that,
we're
I'll
physically approving the minutes now, so.
We got a first.
Second that motion.
There we go.
Hard to second.
There
All
he
in
is.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Last point, have we planned the retreat yet?
That was gonna be my next question.
Oh, cool.
We had talked at the last meeting about trying to do it maybe the first or second week in January.